guess I shouldn't ask that into the microphone, should I? So I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Johnson. He's the Craig and Audrey Thorne Distinguished Professor of Religion at Flagler College, so he's a local gem. He received his doctorate in sacred theology from the Pontifical Gregorian University. He's been at Flagler since 1998. He's a senior Fulbright scholar and chair of the Research Advisory Board of the Franciscan Institute. He has held several fellowships at numerous international universities. He's been invited to be a visiting professor at several international universities. I didn't copy that whole list down. And Flagler has nominated Dr. Johnson twice for the Carnegie Professor of the Year Award. I think he was just talking about this book, the author of The Soul in Ascent, Bonaventure on Poverty, Prayer, and Union with God. And he's the co-author or translator of 12 other books. He has authored 55 journal articles and book chapters. Dr. Johnson serves on the Roman Catholic Historical Commission, charged by the Vatican with investigating the possible canonization of the Native American Antonio Kipa and companions. While his primary area of expertise is in the history of Christian spirituality, and that will be one of the main focuses tonight, and theology, he enjoys teaching a variety of different classes, very diverse, like religion and film and sacred space. Tonight, Dr. Johnson will be presenting on St. Agnes of Prague, whose feast day we celebrate today. We are blessed to have such talent within our diocese, and I am going to offer a warm welcome.
That the sound is okay? Everything coming through? With the mic? Okay, great. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, you are going to learn much more than perhaps you even want to this evening about a rather obscure woman by the name of Agnes of Prague, but she's only obscure in the sense that people aren't really presented with the possibility to get to know her and learn about her. And as we start the Lenten season, I would like to just ask everyone to bow their head for a moment. And we want to pray, especially this evening, following the guidance of the Pope and many other leaders, praying for peace in the Ukraine. This is a penitential season, and we want to offer our prayers for those people who are struggling. And may God bring peace and safety soon. Amen. All right. We start Lent tonight, and I'm hoping to keep this on track, because the last thing I want you to say after this presentation is, I know Lent has started. I sat through a penitential service tonight, which I thought was supposed to be a talk. So I'm going to move it along, and I'm going to be using a number of pictures and a number of texts. Do you have the handout? Do you have the handout?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, I did have a handout for you, but we don't have it, so that means you're going to have to work even harder. Okay. So I'm beginning right here. This is a manuscript picture of Agnes. Notice right away that she has a gray habit. This is the original color for Franciscans, both men and women. And this here on the side, I hope you can read the text here, gives you an insight into how close Clare considered Agnes. Now remember, they never met in person, but they're living in an age where social media is called letter writing. And letter writing is an important way of staying in contact. I think all of us in the room can remember getting a letter that we loved, that we treasured. Some we threw away, some we kept to our hearts for a long, long time. These are the kind of letters that are going on. Please. So, this is what I'm going to do this evening. I think it's important for you to know how I'm going to lay this out, so at least you think he's got an idea of what he's going to do. Okay, this is not going to be a talk that, like a sermon that goes up, then you think it's going to land, and then it takes off again, and then it lands. We'll go right through this, please. This text, I'm not going to ask you to read through the entire thing. But what it is, it's a very famous story of St. Clare of Assisi. The story goes something like this. Her monastery was being attacked by, remember this name, forces from Frederick. She took the Eucharist out, prayed that God would bless and protect the monastery, and according to the story, the soldiers were driven away. What you cannot see probably very well on the very bottom, where did I get this text from? I got it from a book that was written here in Florida by Francisco Perea, a very famous Franciscan missionary in this area who worked together with Timucua co-editors. Let me be real clear. We used to have this idea in the past that Father was very smart, and of course Father's still smart, but we had this idea that Father would learn the languages and then translate them into the Indian languages. What we now know is much different, that actually the Franciscans worked with the Timucua, and the Timucua themselves were co-editors. So a Franciscan would give, for example, this story to the Timucua, and then they would put it into Timucua. I bring this up right now. We can move to the next slide. I bring this up now to let you know that in the 1600s, people in this area knew about Clare of Assisi. She was not an unknown. Matter of fact, you heard that I'm involved in this canonization project. You may have heard the story of the Florida martyrs. There's a case moving forward that any number of Native Americans and Spanish who were killed could in fact be canonized. And Antonio is the chief martyr in this cause. His daughter was named Clare. So we know that Clare, at least St. Clare, was well known in this area in the 1600s. And matter of fact, we know Pedro Menendez actually brought a statue of St. Clare with him. So what I'm trying to establish here is the fact that several hundred years ago, Clare of Assisi was probably better known than she is right here, right now in Florida. This is a statue, by the way, of Clare from a church in Yucatan. Those kinds of statues would have been everywhere. Okay, can we go? Yeah. So first, let's look at Clare. Has anybody here been to Assisi? Anybody? Okay, so you probably went to the Church of St. Clare, maybe even went down to where she's buried. And so that's a view of that church from the air, looking down from the area of Sabasio. So the story of Clare is really stunning in and of itself. She's a young, rich girl. At a very young age, she hears Francis of Assisi preaching. He grabs her heart. In that preaching, she decides to leave her family, rich family, and follow Francis. And so she goes out, she joins with others, and she becomes a follower of Francis. This is at a time, remember, that Franciscans are what we call mendicants. They're moving around. Clare, however, because of the situation with women at that time, she's made to stay in a monastery. There's a big debate, of course. Did she want that? Did she not want that? Clearly, though, she was a deeply devoted follower of St. Francis. She became the abbess at the Church of San Damiano, and she was canonized very quickly after her death. We could do a whole presentation on her. I just want you to understand just the women involved in this story are really extraordinary. And this is a story of relationships. So when you think about Agnes of Prague, you think about a woman who is in deeply involved spiritual relationships with those around her. So this is the world of St. Clare. If you've gone to Assisi, maybe you even went to the Church of San Damiano. It's a very, very simple church that Francis rebuilt. You can see there's the chapel there. That's the walkway leading up. That's the inner courtyard. And that's what we call the refectory, where they would eat. Very humble, simple structure. This is where Clare lived when she was writing Agnes. So you heard that saying all the time, right? Location, location, location. Location is important. Now here's a very sort of heady intellectual statement that I'm just going to read off. To underestimate, ignore, and diminish space amounts to the overestimation of text, written matter, and writing systems, along with the readable and the visible, to the point of assigning to these a monopoly on intelligibility. Okay, your test now is, what does that mean? What does that mean? It means simply this. This French scholar is reminding us that when we try to learn, we often go to what we can read. And we think that most understanding comes to us through reading. And what he's trying to tell us is everything that we write emerges from a particular place. So the place is more important many times than the writing itself to understand what took place. So here I have two pictures of medieval sisters who are writing and reading. So now I'm trying to set this stage up for you now. You're seeing Claire, you're seeing the monastery, you understand that she's writing in this place. Oh, I think we're back a bit. No, you have to go the other way. Okay, now just the next, please. So now we're moving to Agnes. She, like Claire, came from a very, if you will, important, influential family. So right away you've got two women who have a social background that they can share. In other words, they're familiar with the court. They're familiar with royalty. She, in particular, is really a strategic player at this time. Her mom and dad, King and Queen of Bohemia. Of course, at this time, women are often used as a way of setting up relationships, alliances. So they have her set up already to marry this duke. He dies. And so then her parents are looking for who else can. And of course, it's got to be the best, right? It's got to be the best. So the best of the best is Frederick II. We heard Frederick before, just a little while ago in that story. So Frederick wants to marry, and she, however, says, I don't want to get married. I want to follow the poor Francis. I want to live my life in poverty, chastity, and obedience. I don't want to be married. So she appeals to Pope Gregory, and he says, okay, he gives her the permission. So very quickly she enters religious life. She's canonized much later, 1989, and I'll talk about the importance of that date in light of what's happening today in Europe. So this is the world of Agnes of Prague. Who's been to Prague? You got to go to Prague. It is really stunningly beautiful. Medieval town, so it's kind of got a small feel to it. Beautiful art and architecture. And this is where her convent is found. It's now a museum. Went through some really hard times from periods of history. But that's my Agnes on the left. That's my wife. So that was a particularly special moment, right, when we could go. Now she's Agnes, not Agnes of Prague, but the Agnes famous for singing, the young martyr. But nevertheless, it works really great, right, for a picture. So here's Prague, and there's the entryway to the convent. It's in stunning shape, the way they've restored it. Absolutely phenomenal. Please. So what does she do? Why does she grab our attention? Why does she especially become an example for people even today? It's her immediate turn to charity. What she wants to do is she has the finances to get people to build these different buildings. So among the different structures that she's helping to subsidize is a hospital, the first hospital there. And not only is it something she's just a benefactor for, she's actually helping the poor themselves. I think it's hard for us to understand or really to perceive what this would be like, right? When a queen gives up her power, her crown, and starts taking care of the poor. And so here's a very famous picture of her taking care of those in need. So the first point I want to mention, why is she someone we would want to look at today, is that she went out of her way to help those in need, even when she had everything to lose in a certain sense. She gave it up to be able to do this. Here's a picture of Clare on the left, Agnes on the right, and this is a contemporary icon that someone did to commemorate what I'll call the epistolary relationship, this idea of writing back and forth, writing back and forth. So they're writing for a significant period of time. Clare hears news, by the way, of this queen who's decided to live a life like her, and she's interested. News is passing. Now, not as quick as today, but there are people going back and forth all the time. Have you heard the story? You know about Agnes. Can you believe that this queen? Clare hears this, and she starts to write. Please. So this was the first part of the handout, and I was going to give you a test on this, but I think it's big enough that you can see this. Each one of these texts here, first letter, second letter, third letter, fourth letter, that's the introductory sentence of Clare's letter to Agnes. Take a look at this for a minute. And if this was class, this would be the assignment I would give to the students. How can you tell their relationship is changing by the very first? The first one is written when she hasn't yet decided to be a sister, but she's thinking about it. Okay? The second let's go back one, Peter, back to the slide before. Next slide, because we jumped from one to the second. So this is the first part, actually, that I wanted you to look at. This is the first part, okay? To the esteemed and most holy Virgin. That's Clare's writing, and she's not sure yet if Agnes is going to make the move, but she wants to support her. So notice what she says. She mentions, first of all, what is her status right now? What's her social status? Her status is she's the Queen of Bohemia. Okay. Now, notice in the second already how that switches. No mention of the King of Bohemia, but the King of Kings. So now Clare knows, she's heard the news that she's taken her vows and gone into the monastery. And then you can see how their relationship deepens. The third, to the lady most respected in Christ and sister to be loved before all mortals. That's a pretty strong statement. Is it possible to love someone that much and never see them? I would posit yes. I would posit yes. Because there is some kind of kindred sharing of spirits that's going on, where both of them realize that at their core, they've been brought to the same kind of decision in life, and that's what they share at their deepest levels, that commitment. And then we get all the way to the end, and we can see how, to her who is half of my soul. It's said when you love someone dearly, you share souls with them. And when they die, you lose something because of that sharing. This is Clare now writing right before her death. Okay, now to the second piece. Here, now you can see how Clare defines herself. First, she's just talking about her being in charge. And notice how her greeting now changes. May you live in the highest poverty. So what has happened in the meantime, Agnes made a commitment to poverty, and it's a very strict poverty. And Clare can understand how difficult it's going to be for her to live this life. So the second letter, she brings up this idea of poverty to try to get her to hold on to that. Then by the third, the joys of redemption and the offer of salvation, and was better thing to be desired. Whatever better thing can be desired. See how she's moving. Now she's not talking just about poverty, she's wishing her every blessing. And then as Claire is getting close to death, she's thinking about the throne of God, where she's going to be soon. And so she asks Agnes to join her too as she moves towards that eternal encounter and be present with her in prayer. So this is the importance of these kinds of letters. I've only shown you 2 verses from each letter, and already you know by reading that, and not just reading the words, but watching how the relationship develops, like any loving relationship that we've been in, you can see it going deeper and deeper and deeper. This, by the way, is very hard to do when you're texting someone. Texting just doesn't quite do that. And if you come from that past that I do, where you had to actually spend some time thinking about the letter before you sent it, because you only have this space, right? You can't do a rewrite. You only have this space. What do you want to get across in that time with that space? I need to get to the most important things. That's the beauty of letter writing. So when you open that letter, and please understand too, at this time, when those letters would come, they would be read to the whole community of sisters. Okay? So they wouldn't be just private, they would be heard. And we still hear part of this today, right? I get an email from someone and I write back, well, it was really good to hear from you. I didn't hear a thing. I didn't hear a thing. But it goes back to that old idea that when you would get something, you would read it. And you would read it out loud. Please. So the question becomes, when we're in Lent, and it's the question that I work with often with students is, so what? Okay, now you know this. Yes, you're clearly more educated on epistolary relationships, women in the Middle Ages, and love and letters. But what do we do with that? So I tried to then put this in the context of the gospel that you would hear today. So the gospel for today offers us the traditional threefold understanding of Lent. We are called in Lent to what? We're called to give alms, to help those in need. That's the first. The second is we're called to fast. And the third is we're called to pray. And now notice how this works with a relationship. Giving alms is reaching out to someone else. Fasting is reaching inside of me. Prayer then becomes the combination of those two being lifted up. So that's the dynamic here of Lent. So Peter, if I could ask you to... That was just another part of that gospel. And this, by the way, is the inside of the church in Prague. Like I said, it's been turned into a museum, but it is a magnificent Gothic structure, as you can see. Stunningly beautiful. So we've got the 3 Lenten calls: alms, fasting, prayer. And I'm not here to tell you how to do that. The gospel invites you. What does our saint have to say about that, please? First of all, she does remind us about service to the poor. Now, how we work that out in our lives, of course, could be far different than hers, but nevertheless, she had the courage to do it in the way that she thought was best, which then becomes our invitation. How do we do that? I like this painting a lot because remember I showed you the gray habit at the beginning of the presentation? I said, notice how she's gray. Look at here. You can see it's like she's taking off her royal clothes, revealing this habit underneath, the habit of one who's a servant. So I find that very, very powerful. Second, please. We know that Agnes and Claire were very, very strict with fasting, ways that probably would stun us. And quite frankly, I will definitely fall short in that regard. Nevertheless, fasting for all of us too can be interpreted in different ways. This is from Claire writing to Agnes, talking about states. Yes, fast, but you're a human being. So find a way to do that in the best way that you can. But the object is not to prove that you're the best by hurting yourself. That never works. And also then, it's a life dedicated to prayer. Here's another modern image that I found. Internet has some really interesting options when you start looking into these saints, because since they're saints that are still alive for many people, including myself, you find people, contemporary people, trying to refigure that, right? Reimagine it. So here's a beautiful, I think, image of Claire, Agnes, praying. So we've got the 3 Lenten calls, right? Please. I came across this article too. You may even want to look it up sometime. It's reflecting on the image in the mirror. And it's an article written by a housewife, very busy woman, running to the store, bringing her kids everywhere. But she read the letters of Claire and Agnes, and she picked up a main idea from Claire, this idea of a mirror. Claire asks Agnes to look into the mirror to see if she can see herself in Christ. So this young mother took that and really ran with that and said, what does that mean for me in my life as a young mother? Which shows you, once again, the beauty of the saints, that somehow in some way, even if you can't be like them, they inspire something that pulls the best out of us and helps us to adapt it to our life. Please. So here is a medieval mirror. And mirrors are often identified with vanity. You wake up in the morning, you look in the mirror, and you go, no, that's not me. That's not me. I got to do something, right? I got to do something, because that looks a little bit too realistic. So we look in the mirror, but then it's also a way of asking ourselves, what do we need to do? Now with a mirror, a medieval mirror, it's in the center that you can see the best. And around the edges you can't see as well. So she's going to come up, if we could move to the next. This is a very long text, and I won't have us read all through this. But notice she says, since he is the radiance of eternal glory, is the brightness of eternal light, the mirror without blemish. So she's talking about Jesus. Look into the mirror of Jesus and see what you see. So she says to her, look at that mirror every day. Now remember, these are women who no doubt spent a good amount of time growing up with mirrors, making sure that they were looking as they were expected to look. Now they're taking that very implement that they have and saying, let's look at it with a different eye. As it goes through, you can see on the right, then reflect upon it the surface, and follows through all the way to when you get to the end, where you look around the mirror and you move closer and closer and closer, and then you see yourself clearly and you see God. That's the meditation that's involved here. Once again, brilliant, gazing in the mirror. This is one of the motifs we see all the time. But to gaze in the mirror, not with the idea that I don't look the way I should, or why don't I look like others? It's how do I look when God looks at me? How does Jesus see me? How do I look? That's a more positive, powerful, beautiful image. And she asked her to, in other words, every day look in that mirror and remind yourself of how beautiful you are in God's eyes and how deeply God in Jesus loves you. One. Okay, that one there. This is a scene from 1989 in Prague. Think about this, and then think about what you're seeing on TV right now. What's happening in places like Kiev and other places. Agnes was canonized on November 12, 1989. That was 5 days before what's called the Velvet Revolution, when the communist government was overthrown, 5 days later. When, of course, Czechoslovakia is split into two, Czech Slovak. The Czech government named her the saint who brought down communism. That's how strong the national identity is tied to a woman that you probably never heard until tonight something about. But if you are in the Czech Republic, regardless of your faith, your background, this is a woman who will remind you not only of taking care of the poor and praying and fasting, but also about standing up and doing what you believe is right. That brings about revolutions. So here I came across, there was supposedly a prophecy that was connected to this. Now, I have no inside track on prophecies. I'm up for interpretations. But evidently there was some kind of belief out there that Bohemia will never reach its greatness until she's canonized. Now that could have been simply church propaganda, right? Trying to get her canonized. There's a lot of reasons why people move this. But it is stunning to think that right after this, the government falls. So that's pretty much what I have for you. I do want to take a moment and find out if there's any questions, or we could go back to a couple texts if you want to go deeper with them. But like I said, I don't want this night to be remembered as a night of severe penance, which I never reached after. Yes, please.
How many monasteries, abbeys, et cetera, did she find? Is it just the one, or did she spread it across?
She founded one monastery, and then but good question, she found also a hospital, and then she founded a religious order to serve in the hospital. So those are her two main contributions, if you will. She builds this monastery, becomes the abbess there. Evidently, she wasn't big on the abbess title. She preferred to be more referred to like, one of the superiors or one of the leaders, because abbess has a really heavy sort of ideological role too of power. And it's clear that she was trying to get away, at least from that secular expression of power. And so that group is the one that then runs that hospital and makes an incredible impact on the Czech society as well. Agnes was in contact with Gregory IX, and she got in some, ecclesial fistfights with him, and as did Clare. And the reason being is, and I say that with a smile, is both women were so radical. They wanted to go deeper and deeper and deeper into this evangelical life. And as often happens in church history, there are certain forces that don't want to allow that. If for no other reason, you can't take care of yourself, you need our help, we'll build you a monastery, we'll have walls around it, we'll make sure you get the food that you need. And both Clare and Agnes saying, no, we want to be beggars. We don't want a steady income. We don't want those luxuries. We want to actually, believe it or not, trust in God and trust that God will take care of us. So there is this back and forth. We have letters with Gregory and Agnes going back and forth. Clare wanted what was called the privilege of poverty, absolute poverty. And if you've been to Assisi and you saw where she was buried, when they uncovered her body, they found in her hand the actual papal document that she had received from the Pope guaranteeing that she could have that right. So, anybody else? Question? Yes, please.
What about the languages of the letters and communications?
What about?
It was Latin or?
Latin, yes. And if we flip one more, you'll see that I've written a number of scholarly articles on this issue. The language is very, very important for me. Mm-hmm. And so it is Latin, and both of the women are clearly well educated. So this is another one of those stereotypes that sort of disappears when you study especially women in the Middle Ages. I'm doing a course on medieval religion and culture right now, and we are really accentuating the contribution that women made to theology and the fact that they're educated and they're writing back and forth, and they're doing their own theology. Okay, so they don't have a position at the university, but Clare's letters are full of theology. Who is Jesus? What does it mean to follow Jesus? How do we share our love with others? So it is Latin, and they're probably working, and this is one of the dynamics that I always find attractive, is they're working in groups. So what would happen is a small group of us would get together, and Clare would say, I want to write Agnes. Can someone take some notes down? And so they compose it together. So it's a community, in a sense, writing another community. And you can see that, and like I said, because when they arrive, they're heard out loud. They're binding people over. I don't know if you've had this experience, but if you got a letter from someone you loved, you hold on to it. Sometimes you even smell it, touch it to your face, read it out loud because that person becomes present. And this is what I think was happening. Unfortunately, we don't have the letters from Agnes to Clare. We have the letters from Clare, and there could have been more letters too that we simply don't find. It's just one of those beautiful good fortune that we can celebrate, that we do have some of those letters. Yes?
When are the letters kept?
Were the letters kept? Right now, that is a good question. I'm not even sure. I would have to go back and look where they're kept. I want to say that they're in the Czech Republic, but I would be foolish to make that claim without checking my sources.
And then what was her relationship to Wenceslas and Ludmilla?
So you mean the king? Okay, so her father is a king, but he's Octavar, but then they're in relations with different kings and queens throughout Europe. And one of the things that she does is she is instrumental, and once again, I think this is something that's important for us. She's instrumental in negotiating among the family to keep down violence and family problems. So she's totally involved, and I didn't stress this, but she's also totally involved in European politics. See, she plays at two levels. She has now a really strong spiritual persona, but she's still the daughter of a king. So she's still able to weigh in on public matters and deal with different kings and queens, and also work to negotiate different kinds of alliances. This is why it's tricky for, I think, Pope Gregory, because he needs her also to be able to help him at the political level as well as the religious. So we're dealing with, I think, at one level, a very simple person, but then at another level, very complex. Please.
She didn't have any title, though, as daughter of king. I mean, she gave that up.
She gave up the crown, but she still remained the daughter.
Right.
So what that means is she still has that kind of access to the king, the queen. So she may have left the crown behind and said, I didn't want to enter into the royal society as a wife, but everybody knows who her mom and dad are, and if you want to get to mom and dad, talk to the daughter. So this, of course, becomes a negotiating point with Agnes, too. Well, Gregory, what do I get from you? Now I'm interjecting my own interpretation here a little bit. But I think I can say, when you study history, you notice that these kinds of relationships, it's hard to separate politics and religion at this time. We try to do that, but what's political is religious, and what's religious is political in these days. So she doesn't lose that, she loses the crown, right? She can't say, oh, I'm the queen of the Holy Roman Empire. She would have been, which is the biggest empire at this time. She would have been queen of the biggest empire. She doesn't have that, but she's still involved in politics.
Did her legacy continue throughout the ages, in the 18th, 19th, 20th century?
She, in Bohemia, her legacy comes under tremendous, if you will, I don't want to say attack, but what you have is during the Protestant Reformation, you have a very strong movement called the Hussite movement. And they really went after her and the church, and even, I think, the monastery itself. So for the longest time, you don't have a Catholic culture or a unified Catholic culture that's going to keep her legacy going. Now, the legacy does continue in regards to the hospital. And this is something we often see in Europe when religious orders are suppressed. Governments still like to keep their hospitals open because they serve a need typically that until recent history, states didn't want to take care of. States did not want to have hospitals. They did not want to take care of those people. They were very happy when sisters and others stepped in. So when they suppressed the orders, they try to keep those going. But then what happens, of course, is too, there is a reemergence of interest around Vatican II in religious orders and their founders. And of course, the Vatican Council asked all religious orders to go back, take a look at their heritage, ask the question, how do we live that in today's world? That brought a lot of focus on Francis and Clare. And when that happened, that's when people start reading Clare's letter to Agnes and saying, this is probably the deepest, or one of the deepest insights that we have into the spirituality of Clare herself. But to use that mirror image, we're seeing the reflection of Agnes in that mirror as well, in what she thinks about Agnes, how she praises her, how she wants to support her. Very good questions, yes. Deacon.
So, Agnes was a pen pal of Clare, also Gregory IX.
Yes.
Were there others that she corresponded with?
The ones that I'm familiar with right now are the ones with Gregory and Agnes, but I do believe there were some to other officials, but once again, I need to be really careful there because the letters I'm familiar with are the ones to Agnes and then the ones, or Agnes's letters to Gregory.
So, who was it that promoted her cause so that Pope St. John Paul the Great would then canonize her in 1989?
Well, when it comes to canonization, there's always a number of different groups that are interested. Now we know, of course, with Pope John Paul II, he had a deep interest in canonizing saints that were connected to local and regional situations, and was quite astute as well when it comes to politics. So I can't say who was the one person. What typically happens, and of course we're working on that whole canonization question right now, there's a number of different forces that come into play. You have what's called the fama. The fama is the legacy, the fame that people still remember. So even if she's sort of moved to the side, people still know that's her church, they know about her good works, they know about the hospital. So there's a basic fama. Then on top of that, then you start getting different ecclesial officials that start asking the question. And I know that there had been a lot of work to try to move her canonization forward. But remember, once you get into the Protestant Reformation and the struggles there that go on for a while, those groups that would support her and push her through are probably either non-existent or not making that their central focus because of all the other things. So when you get down to this time now, of course, you have this resurgence in the East Bloc at that time of religion, both Protestant and Catholic. And so you saw that Pope John Paul II, the saint, canonized a couple different women from these areas, including Queen Kiniga and others. So he canonized a couple women who were royalty in those Slavic countries. And I think, once again, this is where I can only go on what I read and what I intuit, is it was as much political as spiritual. When you have a people who are struggling and really struggling to find a way to stand up for their national identity, when you hold up one of their people as a model, that has a real rallying cry. So once again, even with the canonization here that we're working on, there's no one group. Although, let me make a plug for the group that's working for the canonization of the Florida martyrs. The primary group that's pushing that canonization are the lay people from the Tallahassee area who had moved into that area and started looking around and realized, oh my goodness, there's so much Franciscan history here. Our kids don't know anything about this. Let's find out. So they started finding out about the Native Americans who were massacred, the Franciscan priests who died, and they were the ones that actually pushed it forward. It wasn't priests, it wasn't bishops. So in that case, it's maybe because I'm still alive and they're still alive and I could talk to them and figure out what's going on. I can say that it's really, Florida has something really to be proud of, not simply in these martyr stories, but the active role of the people who have pushed this cause forward. Like I said, it's not coming from the top down. It is coming from the bottom up. And the beautiful thing about that is it's heartfelt, and people are realizing that in their backyard could have very well been Native Americans who died for their faith. And why not tell their story? Why not share that with the world? Especially in these times when, and we think Pope Francis will be very open to this idea, especially because of the fact that these are indigenous peoples. And so often our saints tend to be nuns, great, priests, wonderful. But to know that there were hundreds and hundreds of Native Americans who could have fled, could have given up their faith, but instead stood firm, often crucified, all kinds of different things, that is a tremendous testimony of faith. So something about Agnes brings the Czech identity together in such a way that makes it a force for change. And it's not just people being proud of this, but what a leader, what an example. Would that it were that our richest would actually take that moment, not that they all have to join convents, but make that move in charity. Wonderful questions. Anybody else? Everybody okay? Not too bad? Do I have to put more ashes on everybody's head? Because you made it through. Well, listen, thank you very much.
I do have one other
Oh, yeah,
question
please.
about the lady, I think it was Jennifer Lindbergh, that wrote the article about the Christ in the mirror. You said the mother. Where do we find that?
If we can move the slide to, I put it in the sources. Yeah, I think you'll really like that. Oh, one back. Those are my articles. You can move on to the next. You might, if you have a phone, you might want to just take a picture of that. That's what my students do all the time. They just take a picture. I do all these things on the board, and I'm hoping that they're going to take notes. They just wait till I'm done, take a picture.
And Catholic Mom is really a great site. I mean, she's a great writer.
Oh, so you know her, okay,
For stuff for working with kids. She's a homeschool mom.
okay.
And she posts a whole lot. That's just a shameless PR for catechesis for kids.
No, all these, by the way, all these are contemporary, right? So this is a contemporary woman writing, and these are sisters who are painting and coming up with these images. That tells you how strong the force of the person is today. When you have American mothers reading about a queen, potential queen, who became a poor sister, and somehow they find meaning in their life through that, that's what we call in like technical terms an excess of meaning. In other words, you can't control this person in time and space. They are so powerful that their influence jumps from time to time to time. All right. Thank you very much for coming out.
Thank you, Doctor, this is great.
I appreciate it. The presentation is not a finished work. There's some things that I need to do to tweak it a little bit. But instead of trying to be a perfectionist, I enter among the sinners of Ash Wednesday, and I present you with an incomplete but hopefully inspiring introduction. Thanks.
I just have a question that doesn't have to do with.
Oh, of course, of course.
But, because I've asked it at the shrine.